something unusual happens in St. Peter's Square, something that stands out even in a place filled with constant movement and noise. Pope Leo XIV suddenly stops at a specific spot where people usually just walk past without thinking twice. Yet this location carries deep historical weight. It is the same place where, in 1981, Pope John Paul II was shot during an assassination attempt. At this moment, Leo XIV stops walking completely and kneels down on the ground. It does not look like a planned gesture or something ceremonial for appearance. Instead, it feels deeply personal, almost like a moment of reflection or emotional weight taking over him. He remains there in silence for several minutes. That silence becomes powerful enough that even the surrounding crowd seems to change. People who were talking, moving, or taking photos begin to slow down and feel something unusual in the atmosphere. Witnesses later describe the scene as heavy and still, as if time itself had paused for a moment. Security personnel also become alert. A pope suddenly kneeling in a public space is not something that normally happens without preparation. For them, it raises immediate concern. But Leo XIV does not appear to be in danger or distress. Instead, everything about his posture suggests intention, something internal, not external. To understand this moment, it is important to understand who Leo XIV is. He is actually Robert Francis Prevost, who became Pope in 2025. His leadership style is different from traditional expectations. Rather than focusing on celebration or public display, he is more focused on responsibility, historical burden, and spiritual weight. Before becoming Pope, he had already spent years deeply studying previous popes, especially John Paul II, and the major events connected to their papacies. One of the most significant events in modern church history is the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. While traveling through St. Peter's Square, he was shot by Mehmet Ali Agca. The attack left him critically injured, but he survived in a way many described as miraculous. What made the story even more powerful was what happened later. John Paul II chose to personally visit his attacker in prison and forgive him face to face. However, the full details of that prison conversation were never publicly revealed. Only fragments and interpretations exist, which has left a sense of mystery around what was actually said between them. Before becoming Pope, Robert Prevost reportedly studied this entire case in depth. During his time in Vatican archives, he came across a handwritten letter from John Paul II. In this letter, forgiveness was described not just as an action but as a deeply emotional and spiritual responsibility. This idea had a strong impact on Prevost. For him, forgiveness was no longer just a moral concept. It became something active, something that must be completed, not only believed. After becoming Pope, Leo XIV continued his normal duties, meetings, prayers, travel, and official responsibilities. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but observers noticed one consistent behavior. Whenever he walked through St. Peter's Square, he often slowed down near the same historical location tied to the 1981 attack. It was as if that place held a silent emotional weight for him. Then comes 11 May 2026, which becomes a turning point in the story. On this day, his routine is interrupted. He receives a response from Turkey connected to Mehmet Ali Agca. The Vatican had already been involved in quiet diplomatic communication regarding him. Although details remain limited, the response appears to have a strong emotional effect on the Pope. It becomes the moment that seems to trigger a deeper internal decision. Later that same day, he goes to St. Peter's Square again. But this time, something is different. He walks directly to the symbolic spot and stops. Then he kneels down and remains in silent prayer for 2 to 4 minutes. It is not a public performance. It feels like an internal emotional process being expressed physically. People present cannot fully explain what they see, but many describe a sense that something significant is happening beyond words. After returning from the square, he requests the archived file of John Paul II once again. He spends around 3 hours studying it in detail. This suggests a deep reflection process rather than a political or administrative decision. Following this period of reflection, Leo XIV writes a personal letter addressed to Mehmet Ali Agca. The letter is not an official Vatican statement. Instead, it is symbolic, neither purely forgiveness nor confrontation. It represents a continuation of a story that began decades earlier with John Paul II. Reportedly, Agca responds emotionally to the letter, described as being moved. This reaction adds another layer of complexity to the situation, though full details are not publicly known. Now, the story moves toward its next chapter, a planned trip to Fatima. This location is already one of the most symbolically important sites in Catholic history. It is connected to the visions of Our Lady of Fatima, the legacy of John Paul II, and even interpretations of survival after the 1981 attack. Leo XIV's upcoming visit is seen as the continuation of this unfolding emotional and spiritual narrative. At this point, the story is no longer just about historical events. It becomes a journey involving memory, forgiveness, faith, and responsibility, where the past and present are deeply connected, and where every action seems to carry symbolic meaning far beyond the surface.